A warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us in the next series on Indian writing in translation. We are fortunate enough that we are not only witnessing one of the most significant times in history where struggle has taken center stage, and we are blessed to have one poet in our syllabus who has brought struggle as a way of existence to all of us. Faiz Ahmad Faiz, as he says, हम देखेंगे, लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, वो दिन के जिसका वादा है, वो लोहे अजल में लिखा है, हम जुल्म सितम के कोहे गरां, रूही की तरह उड़ जाएंगे, हम महकूमों के पांव तले, ये धरती धड़ धड़ धड़केगी और अहले हकम के सर ऊपर जब बिजली कड़कड़ कड़केगी, अब अर्ज खुदा के काबे से सब बुत उठवाए जाएंगे, हम अहले हफा मरदूद हरम मनसब पे बिठाए जाएंगे, सब ताज उछाले जाएंगे, सब तख्त गिराए जाएंगे, सब ताज उछाले जाएंगे, सब तख्त गिराए जाएंगे. Look at the beauty of these lines and the simplicity and ease with which he brings revolution. No wonder Edward Said has read brilliantly about him, as he says that he's one of those few poets who can bring to you. Now let me begin with my PowerPoint presentation. Let me share it with you so that you can read what Said has mentioned about this great poet. Now read it for yourself, as he says. The poet whose poetry combined the sensuousness of Yeats with the power of Neruda. Now the words that एक वक्त ऐसा आएगा जब हुक्मरान भी डरेंगे और the human, the common will rise beyond the ordinary and will strike up a revolution to create a mass movement. Right? India, with its farmers' revolution, the COVID crisis, and elections all over the country, whether they are regional elections or municipal elections, or whether they are constant struggles of human existence, Faiz has never failed to capture these moments. And that is why he has the power of Neruda and the sensuousness of Yeats. But before we proceed to read the poems that have been given to us in text, we have to understand why are we reading Faiz. Now we are reading Faiz for a reason. If you could read from the slide here, he says, "Bol ke lab azad hai tere, bol zuban ab tak teri hai. Tera sutwa badan hai tera, bol ki jaan ab tak teri hai." I mean, how can one even encapsulate the fact that their body or their voice or their tongue isn't theirs? But we find ourselves tongue-tied in so many situations that it takes people like Faiz to wake us from that slumber. And that is why he is a spokesperson of the world's voiceless and the sufferings of the people. Whether it is the Indians oppressed by the British in the 40s, or the freedom fighters in Africa, or the Rosenbergs in the Cold War of America in the 50s, or the Vietnamese peasants fleeing America's napalm in the 60s, or Palestinian children living in the refugee camps in the 1970s. Faiz wrote painfully and stunningly and compassionately of the human aspiration for freedom. A hallmark of his verse, and more than once an excuse to refuse him an entry in the United States. Yes, he was banned in the United States for having written the misery of the human condition so deeply. So we have a man with us. We have his writings with us, which speak about the world's sufferings, which give voice to the world's voices. We also have him here because he's the creator of forms. He's the poet people have grown up reciting in every household where poetry has been a medium of existence. Faiz is certainly one stream. So there are people who have grown up studying him. He's famous with the artists. There are leading singers of the subcontinent. There are poets, there are ghazal singers who have chosen his ghazals to be sung at the most popular platforms possible, whether it is Noor Jahan or whether it is the American poet Lazard. They have chosen Faiz as their favorite choice, as their favorite ghazal writer, nazm writer, to give their voices to the world. Another reason why Faiz is special is because he could dissolve the cultural differences. He was somebody who had studied English literature in school and college and was well versed with all sorts of British and American influences of writing, and therefore could bring out the best in the two languages, and was a favorite choice to dissolve the cultural differences. The next is, or the next reason, if I could say, is one of my favorite ones because he is you can say, a revolutionary or a love poet, a revolutionary love poet, or a revolutionary and love poet, because as we understand life, love and revolution go hand in hand, right? Especially to the people who lived in an India that witnessed an independent struggle and a partition. If you could go back to Bhagat Singh, he said, Azadi meri dulhan hai. Now, bringing the two together, a revolution and love. If you could go back to Amrita Pritam, she says, Aj akhan varish shanu, koi agla var ka fool. Aj akhan varish shanu, kiton kabran vichon bol. Aj kitabe ishq da, koi agla var ka fool. Ik roi si thi Punjab di, tu likh likh mare bain. Now she was actually trying to bring the poet to challenge कि एक बेटी जब रोई थी तो आपने एक पूरा love epic लिखा. Now after partition there are hundreds and hundreds of women, there are hundreds and thousands of women who have been massacred, raped, put in a shameful position, forced into certain transitions. Now where are the poets of those times, and why aren't they writing? The answer to her is probably Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who did write revolution and love together to bring us classic poetry. Now here is the man with some mission and some milestones. Born in Sialkot in the undivided Punjab of 1911, Faiz came from the rustic stock. His ancestors were Punjabi Muslim peasants. His father, however, had served the royal family of Afghanistan and later studied in England, becoming a lawyer after Cambridge and Lincoln's Inn. Unlike his father, Faiz did not travel till much later, but he imbibed the spirit of the 1930s from books and pamphlets and went on to earn a master's degree in English literature and another in Arabic literature. In a sense, he had embarked on his own inner translations and later did translate into Urdu, the Turkish poet Nazim Hikmat and the Kazakhstani poet Omar Uljaz Ali Suleiman. A decade before independence, which accompanied the partition of the subcontinent in 1947, Faiz's poems were acquiring the color of patriotic feeling and socialist passions. By 1939, Faiz had made a definite name for himself as a poet. His socialist vision continued to color his poetry and also his politics, whereby he saw the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 as a contest in which mankind's destinies were at stake. And as a result, he joined army as a lieutenant colonel, solemnly returning salutes from British soldiers on the Mall in Lahore. After independence, he chose to live in Pakistan. And that is why he's known as the Pakistani Marxist poet. But I think we can contest that anybody born in the Indian soil is as much an Indian poet. So he chose to live in Pakistan and became the editor of Pakistan Times. In 1951, along with several left-wing army officers, he was arrested on the charge of planning a Soviet-sponsored coup. He spent 4 years in prison, mostly in solitary confinement. And as readers, you will see a majority of his work has been written from prison. Zinda ki ek sham, zinda ki ek subha, zinda se likha hua ek khat. You will be reading all of that. So he spent 4 years in prison, mostly in solitary confinement, under the possibility of a death sentence, but was released in 1955. He returned to work on the Pakistan Times. In 1958, he was removed from the post and jailed when Ayub Khan's military government took over. Interestingly, when UNESCO was approaching governments to nominate the representative writers of their countries, so that they could be translated into major languages, Faiz was the first name that the then president of Pakistan, Ayub Khan, mentioned. That is, by the 1960s, Faiz had become Pakistan's unofficial poet laureate, disarming with the poetry some political and even religious prejudices. And that is why his work has been translated in majority of languages, and the work has been taken up by world literatures because the project is run by UNESCO. Now, Faiz's political commitments were particularly towards his Marxist, humanist understanding of history. Audiences may hastily assume that he's the poet of slogans, because बहुत आसानी से हमारे पास slogans हैं, तख्त उछाले जाएंगे, ताज गिराए जाएंगे, बोल के लब आजाद है तेरे. So he might be understood as a poet of slogans, but there is more to his genius, because in his poetry lies his ability to balance his politics with the aesthetics of life. He said once, the future of ghazal, like the future of poetry, depends upon the talent of its future practitioners. Vedantically speaking, there is no good or bad in poetry, but the poet makes it so. Some insight into the future of this much maligned and much admired form of expression, it were best to look at the past. So poetry has to build a consensus between the past and the present so that the vacillation keeps you oscillating for more, keeps you pulsating for more. And that is why you see that a huge amount of Faiz's work is offered in the universities of India and abroad for translation and academic deliberation. And one such translator has given us The Rebel's Silhouette, which is translated by Agha Shahid Ali. Now, Agha Shahid Ali's translations, though there have been questions on this translation, And there are people who have produced other versions of their translations, which, if drawn a comparison of, could either be better or at par what Aga Shahid has done. But there's a reason why Aga Shahid Ali chose to translate Faiz's poems, for a reason, because one, he had witnessed, Aga Shahid Ali had witnessed Faiz very closely when he came to stay with their family once after 1947. And, once you meet a person and he leaves a mark on you, it is very difficult to remove that indelible ink. And he grew up in a family, he was in Srinagar, he grew up in a family where poetry was in the air that he breathed, right? So he started beginning to internalize Faiz. अब आप ऐसे घर में रहते हो जहाँ हर समय आपको पोइट्री सुनने को मिलती है, और हर समय आपको, इससे पहले कि आप लिखना पढ़ना सीख जाएं, you are given a poet to listen to. He becomes a part of your existence. He started repeating Faiz to himself even when he was a child. They, at their home, they would play Begum Akhtar, and Begum Akhtar is someone who has sung a number of Faiz's nazms and ghazals. So in Srinagar in the summer of 1989, suddenly when he was in his house, his grandmother was quoting Milton, and they were studying all poets together, Faiz, Haba Khatun, Mahjoor, Jinda Kaul in Kashmiri, and Ghalib. He received an education, or he received a kind of cultural heirloom where he could negotiate by the demands of two cultures, whether it was English or Urdu. And he himself was a patron of arts. He knew the original language, the original writers so well that once when he was studying in America, he was given a chance to translate his works. He leaped up to it. Right? He understood that it was his loyalty towards these two languages that he should do it. And he received the blessings of Faiz Ahmad Faiz for the same. So probably he is one of the finest choices that Faiz could make. So he says, there are certain cultural nuances that you understand if you are a part of culture. And therefore, though there are other translations available, but we understand that since Aga Shahid Ali is somebody who connects with Faiz at various levels, whether they are familial, whether they are academic or literal, he ultimately becomes our first choice of reading. And the first nazm that you have in your syllabus is Mujhse Pehli si Mohabbat, mere Mehboob na maang. Now, to many of us who have read this or have heard this, it sounds like a verse of love. But without shattering your image of love, here is a revolutionary poet to you who is writing to his beloved about a nation that cannot be loved in the same way as it was loved before. मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरे महबूब न मांग, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब न मांग, मैंने समझा था कि तू है तो दरख्शां है हयात, तेरा गम है तो गमे दहर का झगड़ा क्या है, तेरी सूरत से है आलम में बहारों को सवाद, तेरी आंखों के सिवा दुनिया में रखा क्या है, तू जो मिल जाए तो तकदीर निगूम हो जाए, तू जो मिल जाए तो तकदीर निगूम हो जाए, यूं न था मैंने फकत चाहा था, कि यूं हो जाए, और भी दुख है जमाने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब न मांग। अनगिनत सदियों के तारीख बही माना तिलस्म, रेशमो अतलस हुक्म ख्वाब में बुनवाए हुए, जा बजा बिकते हुए कूचाओ बाजार में जिस्म, खाक में लुथड़े हुए खून में नहलाए हुए, जिस्म निकले हुए अमराज के तन्नूरों से, पीप बहती हुई गलते हुए नासूरों से, लौट जाती है उधर को भी नजर, क्या कीजिए अब भी दिलकश है तेरा हुस्न, मगर क्या कीजिए, और भी दुख है जमाने में मोहब्बत की सिवा, राहतें और भी है वस्ल की राहत की सिवा, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब न मांग। Now here is a man writing to his beloved, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब न मांग, that which was once ours, my love, do not ask me for that love again. Because a man who has been ruined, a man who has been torn apart by the separation of a country, a man who has lost his roots and is unable to find ground, cannot love in the same way again. The world then was gold, burnished with light. मैंने समझा था कि तू है तो दरख्शां है हयात. दरख्शां is bright and hayat is life. मैंने समझा था कि तू है दरख्शां, कि तू है तो दरख्शां है हयात. The world then was gold, burnished with light. तेरा गम है तो गमे दहर का झगड़ा क्या है? गमे दहर is sorrow of life. And only because you, that's what I had believed. How could one weep for sorrow other than yours? जिन्हें मोहब्बत का गम हो, उन्हें बाकी दुनिया के गम से क्या लेना? पर जब देश बांटे जाते हैं, जज्बात बांटे जाते हैं, घर बांटे जाते हैं, थालियां बांटी जाती हैं, ईमान बांटे जाते हैं, धर्म बांटे जाते हैं, तब गमे दहर सामने आ जाता है. How could one weep for sorrows other than yours? How could one have any sorrow but the one that you gave? Now look at the amount of effort that Aga Shahid Ali had to put in this line. For one single line, कि तेरा गम है तो गमे दहर का झगड़ा क्या है? No, this could not be given in one line, and the translator had to make an effort to actually put it into two. How can one weep for sorrows other than yours? How can one have any sorrow but the one you gave? So what were these protests, these rumors of injustice? A glimpse of your face was evidence of springtime. Teri सूरत se hai alam mein baharon mein sabat. Sabat is stability and alam is world. So teri सूरत se hai alam mein baharon mein sabat. A glimpse of your face was evidence of springtime. तेरी आंखों के सिवा दुनिया में रखा क्या है? इन पलकों के उठने और झुकने से दुनिया बदल जाती है. The sky wherever I looked was nothing but your eyes. In the blink of an eye, the universe has changed. If you'd fall into my arms, fate would be helpless. Tu jo mil jaye, to takdeer niguh ho jaye. Takdeer is fate, and niguh is to bow down with all qualities. सजदे में झुक जाना, किसी के आगे झुक जाना, कि अगर तुम मिल जाती तो मैं पूरी दुनिया को झुका सकता था. तू जो मिल जाए तो तकदीर निगुह हो जाए. If you fall into my arms, fate would be helpless. All this I thought, all this I believed. यूं न था, मैंने फकत चाहा था यूं हो जाए. फकत is simply, I had believed that this could possibly happen, but there were other sorrows, comforts other than love. और भी दुख है जमाने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं वस्ल की राहत के सिवा. And wasl means the union of two separated people. He had thought that probably a union with the beloved could possibly be a solution to the miseries of the world. But unfortunately, राहतें और भी हैं, वस्ल की राहत के सिवा. There are other sorrows than the comforts of love. The rich had cast their spell on history. अनगिनत सदियों के तारीख bahimana tilism. Tilism is magic, right? And bahimana is dangerous. And tariq here is dark. हम जो तारीख राहों में मारे गए, we who died in the dark. अनगिनत सदियों के तारीख bahimana tilism. रेशमो अतलसो किन ख्वाब में बुलवाए हो. The rich had cast their spell on history. Dark centuries had been embroidered on brocades and silks. Bitter threads began to unravel before me as I went into alleys in open markets, saw bodies plastered with ash, bathed in blood. Now, he's recalling the scenes of India after her partition. Ja baja bikte hue, kuchao bazaar mein jism, talking about every human soul that was ripped apart of his humanity and was offered in the bazaar of the world. Khak mein luthde hue, flesh lying in dust, khoon mein nahaye hue. There's a blood bath everywhere. Bodies plastered with ash, bathed in blood. I saw them sold and bought again and again. Ja baja bikte hue. Everywhere you can see bodies and souls being sold. And there are certain lines which he deleted later on and which Faiz Ahmad Faiz even could not speak when he was deliberating in one of his narratives. It says, जिस्म से निकले हुए अमराज के तन्नूरों से पीप बहती है गलते हुए नासूरों से. There is disease all around. The stoves, there are boiling cauldrons of disease all around, and there is pus oozing out of wounds. Those lines have been taken away from here. It says, लौट जाती है उधर को भी नजर क्या कीजिए. This too deserves attention. I can't but look back. When I return from those alleys, what should one do? लौट जाती है उधर को भी नजर क्या कीजिए. He wishes to focus on his beloved, but unfortunately there is so much sacrilege, there is so much blasphemous act happening around him that even if he tries very hard, he cannot pay attention. अब भी दिलकश है तेरा हुस्न, मगर क्या कीजिए. You are still so ravishing, but what should I do? अब भी दुख और भी दुख है जमाने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं वस्ल की राहत के सिवा. There are sorrows other than this in this world, comforts other than the love. Don't ask me for that love again. मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब न मांग, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब न मांग. So here is Faiz Ahmad Faiz's first poem for you. उनकी पहली नज़म, उनकी पहली सबसे पॉपुलर नज़म, जो कि शायद हर किसी ने कभी ना कभी अपने जीवन में सुनी है, सराही है. It is for you to evaluate the translation, to deliberate more on this, and I will join you again in the next phase of the same with more of his poems from the prison.